Hello, everybody. Welcome to
Hello.
this webinar on how can we make our cities more sustainable. My name is Dr. Monica Mateo Garcia, and with me is also Dr. Silvia Gulino.
Hello.
We both belong to the School of Built Environment at Birmingham City University. And today we are going to bring you a very interesting topic at the moment with climate change and all the importance in how we can make our cities more sustainable to tackle climate change. And in my case, I'm a lecturer in built environment, and I teach across the courses architectural technology, construction management, and the master in construction project management. I have a PhD in architecture and sustainable urban planning, and my research is mainly focused on low carbon buildings and health indoor environments. And I have the pleasure to be with Silvia today.
Thank you so much. Monica, I share interest and some background as well. I'm associate professor in city making, but my background is both in architecture and planning. So I work across the two disciplines. I also lead the undergraduate course on property development and planning, and I tend to teach on the final year of the undergraduate and the master level. I teach both planning and design subjects, and my research, my interests are on people's experience of the urban environment and the way in which they engage with the urban environment and with their local communities. And I'm particularly interested in community-led initiatives that aim at making cities more inclusive and sustainable. So it's really a pleasure to be here with Monica tonight and present some of our work and some of our interests.
So we are going to start with the presentation. And first, we want to give, before getting into the nitty-gritty, we want to give you a bit of background information. And I'm sure that everybody here knows already about climate change and the risks of climate change because it's in the news all the time. And we are also familiar with this image of severe weather events such as droughts, floods, or even dramatically. Normally, the highest historical CO2 level has been around 300 maximum, and from the 50s, it has totally rocketed, and now it's over 400. And we are following a trend that it doesn't seem to stop. So CO2 emissions continue to grow. And one of the consequences of that is these warming stripes. We can see from when we started getting records of temperatures in 1880 up to now, we can see that the average temperature has increased at around 1.6 degrees. So obviously this is an issue, and we are seeing these severe weather events as a consequence of that. So, but here we're going to talk about something positive, like what can we do? What can the built environment do to tackle climate change and to create sustainable cities? We want to feel that we want to show you that built environment professionals to empower you and to show that we have a key role to play in tackling climate change. There are a number of things, for example, that I'm going to bring you, like heat island. Heat island is when the temperatures in cities are higher than nearby rural areas. We can see that, for example, this is Birmingham because this is close by, and we can see that in the center of Birmingham, temperatures in the city center are higher than in other parts of Birmingham. And we can see the same with London. Temperatures in London are always some degrees higher than in other parts or in other cities in the UK and in other rural areas. And we also have the issue with air pollution. This is also a map of Birmingham, and we can see some red spots where the air is more polluted than other areas. And the problem with air pollution is the contaminants that it brings, like nitrogen dioxide, also harmful for our health. This is regarding cities, but also the buildings that are in those cities. They also play a role in increasing the CO2 emissions. Cities in the end are responsible for over 70% of global energy consumption and CO2 emissions. And of that 70%, 40% is from buildings. During the construction of those buildings and the extraction of materials, what we call embodied carbon, through all the construction phase, and then even the operation phase of the building, when we are, for example, in our houses, we are heating our houses. That's the operational emissions. And also one thing is, you know, for example, in the UK, the building stock, our houses are quite old, and now there are targets of net zero carbon houses by 2050. But the thing is, most of the houses that are now, and the houses that we're going to build now, will be there in 2050. So it's now when we have to act. It's now when we have to design houses that meet net zero carbon targets. And also, at the moment, renovations affect just a very small percentage of buildings. So it's imperative, it's very important, not just to design new buildings, new houses that meet net zero carbon targets, but also to look at the existing buildings. We really need to renovate, to refurbish the buildings, to make them energy efficient. And I'll hand that over now to Sylvia, so she can talk about how we can make the cities more sustainable.
Thank you, Monica. One of the points that we want to put across tonight is that we all work in the built environment. We contribute to cities from different angles. We have obviously skills and competencies that are complementary, but we also work at different scales. So in the case of planning, which is my discipline, we work at a wider scale, and we look at the cities, we look at the regions, we look at the interconnections. And we also go down to smaller scale, and we go down to the residential area, the community area. So the question for me is about thinking about what makes cities more sustainable and how we can contribute to towards that important target. A few considerations that complement what Monica was mentioning before. The world is becoming increasingly urbanized. We know it, and increasingly is something to take into in 2015, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You probably are familiar with it. And so what is that planning can do for sustainability? Now, I would like to invite you to think about a place, some towns in villages, so in very different context. So the way in which we design cities and communities, that the pandemic has also shown us that cities can play a key role in the changes in our cities, in our towns, and that changes can have long-lasting positive effect in relation to global changes. So I would like to focus on open spaces, on different forms of mobility, and on different way of designing and planning locally. So during the pandemic, and in light, the pandemic shed new light on how we experience cities and different spaces. Green spaces have shown to be extremely important on a daily basis as a way of leaving our houses and trying to do some exercise, be more mobile, and generally speaking, finding areas which were contributing to our well-being. So the proximity to green spaces has proved to be vital on a daily basis, particularly for our well-being. Larger parks can provide location where people can walk, run, cycle, play, train, and smaller gardens much closer to where we live in our neighbours, for example, have been daily destination for a great variety of people, including families and children when playgrounds and schools were closed. So green spaces can play an important role in cities, environmentally speaking, but also socially speaking. As I mentioned, green spaces can vary in their sizes, in their format. So when I talk about green spaces, I don't only mean large parks, but also local allotments, community gardens, pocket gardens. Green spaces are able to have very positive role, environmentally speaking. They absorb CO2, they release oxygen, and they have a great role in relation to biodiversity. But they also offer opportunities for leisure time and for well-being. Recent research into the physical and mental health benefit of time spent in green spaces show that even just spending 2 hours a week in a green space can have a long. We mentioned the mental health benefits of spending time in green spaces, but they are also socially very important. Green spaces are suitable for different type of activities and engagement, perhaps at different time of the day of the week, and in that way they accommodate different members of communities, different age groups. So green spaces hold great potential for being inclusive and diverse environments. Together with green spaces, we cannot forget blue spaces. And again, blue spaces can be of different to, again, the benefits of blue spaces in relation to the physical and mental health of people has been proved. So facilitating and allocating such spaces in cities, in communities is extremely important. The second, so we talked about the open spaces as very important, whether they're green or the blue, for the environment and for people. The second element, the aspect extremely important for our cities that has been again emerging quite strong, for example, walking, running and cycling in the city as an alternative to use private transport or public transport is very important. Particularly because a large number of people live in urban areas where pollution levels are often well above the legal limits, and that has affected us health-wise in different ways with respiratory issues, but also increasing the chance of early death. Another aspect that is important, particularly for the purpose of this session tonight, is that the outdoor pollution affects the indoor pollution. So what happens in the cities is actually affecting our own indoor space at home. So how can we make our cities and communities walking, running, cycling friendly? How can we reclaim cities from the traffic? How can we adopt non-cycling, different age group, even children, on their own bicycles? It's an innovative way of thinking about our community. I would like to draw your attention to this emerging idea, very much linked to some debates currently going on in Paris, but it really have been welcomed elsewhere in the world, including in the UK, is the concept of the 15-minute city. So the 15-minute city concept invites us to imagine thriving local areas with easily accessible job and services, better street spaces and active travel, as I was saying earlier, walking, cycling, running, and greener spaces, more resilient communities. So the 15 minutes is having everything, is the idea of proximity and the opportunity of rethinking the way we live and move around the city within a time period of 15 minutes. So that's is a great way of moving away from oil era priorities of roads and car ownership into a post-vehicle era. So how planners work? I would like to show some of the work that our students produce, and to also give you an idea of how we approach cities, neighborhoods, and we relate to city spaces. So we often work on overlooked, sometimes neglected urban spaces. Sometimes they are brownfields, they are contaminated, but they have they are located in interesting corners of the city. Perhaps they have, like in this case, some canals and some greenery, some green infrastructures. And we take spaces that are so overlooked and we transform them into places. What we do is working across different scales. And what we look at, as I mentioned earlier, we look at the big picture. We look at how sites are connected with each other. They are connected within the city. What happens in terms of new infrastructures, for example, new developments, what is going to be likely to happen within a period of time of 10 years. We also look at, we relate to, more broadly speaking, other built environment knowledges, more specialized, for example, on the environment, on green infrastructures, on biodiversity. And as the student was highlighting, was looking at this specific site in Birmingham and how this is related with green infrastructures, how it is positioned, for example, with historic canals, and this can offer opportunities for rethinking about how we can transform this empty or almost empty space. So we need to think about how this relates with multiple things that happen around the site. So this could also mean looking at the surrounding land uses. What happens around that? Are there new developments coming up? Are there listed buildings? Is it perhaps a conservation area? Or also, is it a new major infrastructure like HS2 coming up in the nearby? And what it means for my site, my area, and what are the implications for the future? And it was also important to look at constraints, but also opportunity that this site in this specific context might offer differently, for example, from other areas in a city context. Again, the context is important. What happens around it, what happens in terms of current connectivity, but also future connectivity, how my site is going to be accessible. What does it mean for it? What are the implications? Is it permeable? Is it easily accessible? Or is it something that I need to take into account to make it more attractive and more lively with a possible future transformation? And we also look at examples, cases. We draw upon other case studies, ideas, as the student did in this case, in finding ways to inspire possible transformations within a specific site and make it distinctive, a distinctive place that think in terms of environment, think about the social elements of the people who are going to use it, think about economic elements and the future of this part of the city, not as a site that is limited and bounded in itself, but talks and looks at the city and the future of the city. Monica, this is over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sylvia. And Sylvia has been talking about the perspective from cities. How can we make cities more sustainable? I'm going to cover now buildings, but both of them are linked because what happens outside influences what happens inside. So I'm going to give you like a sort of an indication or a recipe of how can we make buildings that are not just sustainable in terms of carbon emissions, but also resilient against climate change. And on top of that, how can we create buildings, not just that they're sustainable and resilient, but also that provide healthy indoor environments for the people that live inside those buildings. And we've seen that with COVID now. We are now spending a lot of time indoors, and maybe our indoor environments are not as healthy as they should be. So it's something that the professionals of the future will have to start thinking about. And I always like to bring this slide because I always say that that's my motto. The cheapest energy is the one that is not consumed. So that's the best one. So if we can design a building that doesn't consume any energy, that would be great because then we wouldn't have any emissions. But that's a bit tricky. That's a bit difficult. So we need in the end to find a balance. We need to follow this pyramid concept and start first from the bottom and then to the top. So we cannot start from the roof. We cannot start from the top saying, well, I'm just going to install renewables. No, first we need to create an efficient building design so we can avoid the energy demand. After that, the second step would be, let's install efficient equipment to save energy consumption. And at the top, it would be installing renewables to offset any energy consumption. And it has to be always that way, because sometimes people, if they don't look at the buildings in a holistic way, and if we work in silos, we are not going to meet the net zero carbon targets, and we won't do a good job in that sense. And but as I said, we need to think also in how we can provide healthy indoor environments. So just I've been talking about that pyramid to conserve the energy, to make buildings very, very energy efficient, to seal them up, to make them very airtight. Imagine a bag. Imagine if you have a plastic bag and you seal that plastic bag so the air cannot go out and cannot come in. And that's a problem in a house. Imagine that you don't ventilate. Imagine that you are in your bedroom watching TV or doing your homework. If you are in your bedroom, if you don't open windows, if you have everything closed, what happens after an hour, after 2 hours? It starts getting stuffy because the CO2 is starts to building up. So the point of making houses very airtight, to sealing them, to meet the targets, to improve the energy conservation and to reduce the energy bills, is that we create unintended consequences such as poor air quality and overheating. So those are we need to find the right balance of how to improve energy efficiency of buildings, to create sustainable cities, sustainable buildings, and tackle climate change, but also creating healthy indoor environments. How can we do that? Well, this is like a sort of recipe of how we can improve the energy performance, but providing healthy indoor environments. Following with that pyramid, we would have at the bottom things such as passive design. We need to first look at the site and to create a resilient and a good design, looking at thermal mass, buffer zone, super insulation, some concepts that I'll explain in the next slide. After that, as we mentioned before, efficient equipment, and at the top, renewables. But I'm adding some other bits for new homes and existing homes to make sure that we don't just improve the energy performance, but we also improve the air quality and provide healthy indoor environments, such as emission of materials. Some of them have particulate matter or volatile organic compounds, so low emission of building materials. Ventilation, that's key, as I mentioned before, and equipment and appliances, they have to be low pollutant. For example, we'll see like wood burning stoves or gas stoves, they can emit nitrogen dioxide. So we need to think, we need to look at what sort of appliances we install. Also the extractor fans in kitchens, we really need to have powerful extractor fans to extract all the pollutants from cooking. We'll see an example later, and you will be impressed by that. And also monitoring, because by monitoring and seeing what's going on in your house, it's really interesting, because in the end, you make some choices that you wouldn't make if you didn't have those monitoring sensors. So as I mentioned, things like passive design. When we mention passive design, things to consider, such as harnessing the power of the low winter sun, but also preventing overheating in summer, making the most of the natural ventilation. In thermal mass, is the ability of a material to absorb and store heat energy, and then it absorbs during the night and releases the heat. Absorbs during the day and releases the heat at night. So that's thermal mass, and there are some materials that are better for that than others. Buffer zone would be how do we the layout of the different rooms in the house. Cold rooms should go in north, and warm rooms should go to south. So that's buffer zone. And also shading solutions. With the warming temperatures, we are seeing summers that are hotter and hotter, and the temperatures are rising. And we are starting to see more problems with overheating. So why not thinking of shading solutions? Because if we don't let the sun in, then we will have less problems of overheating. So here, for example, some examples from our students, how they analyze the sun path, the prevailing winds. So and also with software, not just by drawing with concept sketches, but also we put that into software and we analyze the sun path. On the right hand side, it was for installing a PV panel. So we and also the design of the building. It was an existing building, and students had to do a low carbon refurbishment. So we analyzed the sun path, for example, and other things like prevailing winds, or where are the trees, or if there are other constraints, etc. Also, in terms of insulation, we need a proper insulation, and you can see there a little drawing of a house. Those are the typical heat losses through the roof, walls, floor, and window, which are normally around 25–30%. If we improve the insulation of the roof or walls, floor, etc., we'll conserve quite a lot the energy in our houses. And the thing is, we can insulate either on the inside of the house or on the outside, as you can see on the left hand side. Also install good and efficient windows, double glazed or triple glazed, as we would do in passive house. And then on the right hand side at the bottom, you see the same building before and after installing external insulation. That's with thermal camera. So you can see that there is a huge difference with the thermal camera of the performance of that building after installing the exterior insulation. These are also examples from our students where they apply all these concepts into their designs, and they make sure that there is a continuous thermal insulation, but without compromising the aesthetics, the concept idea. And in this case, for example, this student was designing also, or incorporating in her design, green roofs and also green walls that they matched perfectly with a very well executed technical design. So in the end, it's design, but also technology, both together to create sustainable buildings. But not just projects from students, even also our own research, the sort of research that we do, that we also bring into the classroom, and then students can also work on those case studies. This is, for example, a hotel, an existing hotel, where we, with the thermal camera, we looked at the heat loss, the key areas where there was more heat loss from inside the building. We also used some equipment to monitor the U value, which is the thermal transmittance. And with that data, we managed to put that into a software and calculate the energy performance specific for that building. And by having that, then we can propose solutions for improving the energy performance of that particular building. And then students can also work on these case studies. And for improving the energy performance and avoiding heat loss, it's very important to address the problem of thermal bridges. Thermal bridge is when there is some people call it also cold spots, because it's where there is a discontinuity in the insulation, and where there is a heat loss, where the warmth escapes from, because the hot temperature always goes from the place where it's warmer to the place where it's colder. So it always goes, the heat transfer, it always goes in that direction. So as you can see, we have a number of images, and it's quite interesting to see the same image. Well, it's at night, because we normally take the thermal images at night, because there is the right difference in temperature so it works properly. And you can see the difference between the photos on the right hand side and on the left hand side. They're the same photos, but they are showing shocking thermal bridges, big thermal bridges, where there is a discontinuity of the thermal envelope. And those are the points that we need to address, and maybe in this case installing thermal insulation on the outside. Or I want to show at the top, you can see the typical photo of any house where there is insulation in the loft. But for example, we see that area which is like a sort of a blue, dark blue, and that's because the thermal insulation hasn't been laid up to the edge. So there we have a discontinuity, a thermal bridge, and as you can imagine, in that place is where the mold grows, because there is a cold spot. The same with infiltration. We need to make sure that we ventilate the house, but try to avoid uncontrolled ventilation, which is the infiltration. And we can see, for example, an image there at the bottom of a window where there is it doesn't shut well, and you can see the draft coming from the window. This is a project that my students did last year. This is the School of Jewelry in Birmingham, and it's a listed building. So we took photos with the thermal camera. some of those windows are, because it's a listed building, they are single glazed, and we can see with the thermal images that there is a considerable heat loss through the windows. So students had to propose some measures to improve the energy performance of that building. Also, architectural technology students in their final year, they have to propose to design a building and also create all the technical details. And you can see in these details that there is no thermal breach. The insulation is totally continuous, but at the same time, the designs are really interesting, really novel, and so that means that demonstrating that we can have buildings that are really appealing, with very good design, but at the same time sustainable and energy efficient. Well, as we mentioned, efficient equipment and also renewables. And here we have another example from a team of students that installed photovoltaic panels, and they did all the calculations to make sure that they had the right number of photovoltaic panels to meet the demand. And as I mentioned before as well, low emission building materials. So, for example, there are some like carpets, paints that they have high emission. So try to reduce that. And monitoring, we can monitor lots of things. We can monitor temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, even levels of ozone. Yeah, there is ozone also inside our houses. Nitrogen dioxide doesn't come just from traffic. If we have good burning stoves or gas stoves, in the end, we will have also nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and those are pollutants that are not healthy. In particular, if there is a long exposure, if we are exposed to these pollutants in a short time, just an hour or something, it's fine. But the point is when there is a continuous exposure to those pollutants. And in the end, we want to be comfortable, and the comfort temperature is between around 19 to 22, 23 degrees, something like that. That's the comfort temperature. And the humidity to be comfortable as well is from 40 to 60 degrees. For example, now that we have the pandemic, COVID-19, we've seen that the virus, that the virus can be transmitted airborne and in small places, in closed spaces that are not well ventilated. It's also the temperature and the humidity are also important, because, for example, if we have a humidity less than 30%, our nasal passages get dry, and the virus can thrive in those spaces with low humidity. So having the right humidity in our houses, in our working spaces, is key also for not spreading viruses. And CO2 is also important. If we don't ventilate, up to, if we are above 1,000, then there starts to be like, when it starts to be like stuffy, and then we have like headaches, drowsiness. So these things are important to be in indoor spaces and to feel healthy. Here there is an example of what I was saying. On the right hand side, you see that in the twin bedroom, during the night, the CO2 goes very, very, very at the top. It's really high, over 1,800. But then in the morning, when they open the window, it suddenly falls at normal levels. So we have monitoring sensors, and we analyze these things. We monitor indoor environments, and we also do some research activities with students. This is another example from a gas stove doing a normal roast, the typical Sunday roast that maybe our parents or we cook during the weekends. And you can see if we do it in a gas stove, the levels of nitrogen dioxide are really, really high. They go up to the top. And yeah, that's really, really interesting and also dangerous. So up to now, after showing a bit of a recipe or the key things to consider for having buildings that are energy efficient, resilient, and also that provide healthy indoor environments, what can we do as professionals in the built environment? I think, and I feel empowered with this particular topic area, because I do think that we can really make a change. We can really contribute to tackle climate change from our profession. And the thing is, there are challenges and opportunities, because the global building stock will double in area by 2060 as the population in the world continues to rise. And most of the population are concentrated in urban areas. By 2060, 2/3 of the expected population of 10 billion will live in cities. And at the same time, if we need to address the CO2 emissions that are increasing, we really need not just to build lots of houses, build lots of buildings, but at the same time to make those buildings sustainable. And here in the UK, that there are also lots of opportunities, career opportunities in the built environment. For example, in 2018, the contribution of construction to the UK economy was 117 billion, around 6%, and 2.4 million jobs directly related to the industry in the second quarter, which is around 7% of UK total. That's it's a very big industry, the construction industry. And as you can see in that image, when we talk about construction sector, it's not just about the people that are in the construction site. There are planners, there are architects, there are architectural technologists, BIM managers, construction managers, quantity surveyors, and lots of other professions that I'm sure I'm forgetting at the moment. But there is a huge variety of professions that are involved in making the built environment, and I think you can make a change being one of those built environment professionals, either designing cities or designing buildings or building those buildings. You can really make a difference. And the thing is, the industry is growing fast, and there are lots of opportunities. There are lots of people retiring in the next 10 years, and we need every year around 700,000 people in industry. So many thanks for being with us up to this point. I hope that it was interesting. And if you want to find more information about our courses or about experiences from other students' careers in the built environment, you can look at that website that you have it in the slide.
Thank you, everyone.